Hello? You have received a fertilizer delivery or have ordered fertilizer and are now getting it delivered. And today we want to tell you a bit about what matters when storing fertilizer. If you receive fertilizer in a big pack, that's a great thing because the fertilizer is no longer mechanically stressed since it is inside the bag. However, you still need to make sure that it is stored under a roof so that it doesn't get rained on all the time. But it is sheltered out of the rain. That's the most important. For loose storage, there are some key points to pay attention to. Let's start with the storage location. The storage location has to be dry. It must be clean. The walls need to be tight. Nothing seeps through anywhere else. Especially with a fine fertilizer, I want to ensure there are no corners where it can leak out, just like when you have it in a dump truck. Seal the corners so that nothing can spill out or anything like that. So first, the storage location must be suitable. Then fertilizers, especially nitrogen fertilizers, are hazardous to water. This means the floor must be absolutely waterproof, so the fertilizer must not seep into groundwater, wastewater, or surface water in any way. Rain must absolutely not leak in through the ceiling. Furthermore, the storage area must be kept very clean and thoroughly maintained. Then we move on to storage. So when I receive the fertilizer and store it, the question is how you store it. If you are storing the fertilizer using a conveyor belt, you need to ensure that no conical piles form. Instead, the conveyor belt should be able to swivel accordingly and distribute the material evenly back and forth. This prevents the fine, dusty particles from accumulating in the center while the coarser particles remain on the outside, ensuring a completely homogeneous storage. Once you have properly stored the fertilizer, the key aspect during both storage and retrieval is to ensure that the fertilizer undergoes as little change as possible. So, when safely handling the fertilizer, what is important to consider? When we create the fertilizer calibration charts, we consider the grain size spectrum. Large and small grain are counting, fine and coarse content, and the surface of the grain. Is it round or angular? What is the flow behavior? These things we consider to make the calibration chart. And the fertilizer should match the calibration chart exactly after storage when it's in the spreader. So it is important to store the fertilizer in a way that minimizes any changes, and it changes either due to mechanical stress such as augers, conveyor belts, or if it falls from too great a height. So the conveyor belt should be kept as low as possible to prevent excessive falling distance. If it passes through the auger too often, its structure changes. That's why any mechanical stress should be avoided. By the way, this also happens when driving over it. This is more of an issue during unloading. If I then drive in with the wheel loader or telehandler and repeatedly drive over the fertilizer, the granules break apart. That's not good either. So as little mechanical stress as possible. The second way it can change is through moisture. That means I have it here like the fertilizer. It's not covered right now, but it should be covered. That means with a film over it, the film should go all the way to the top, covering the edges and corners as well. When there's moisture, clumps form and a crusty surface develops, and those clumps won't pass through the fertilizer spreader through the sieve and can't be spread properly. So covering is really important, and the whole door should be closed to keep moisture out. All right, the next thing is we have stored it. Then we always recommend attaching the shipping document to the fertilizer box. So for example, I would hang the note on the wall here that says what kind of fertilizer is inside. Why is this needed? Firstly, it helps prevent mix-ups when storing different fertilizers. Another reason is that if, for example, the fire brigade arrives for some reason and needs to know what is stored there, they must be aware of the water hazard classification. It's helpful if it's clearly labeled with the type of fertilizer so it can be easily documented in advance. Then when you are working with the fertilizer, you must of course pay attention to your personal protective equipment. So always wear gloves and sturdy footwear. Fertilizer can also be slippery, so be careful not to slip and fall. Additionally, when handling storage and retrieval, wear appropriate respiratory protection or masks to avoid inhaling dust. Make sure to be cautious, and once you're done, naturally wash your hands and so on. It goes without saying, or simply wear gloves, which should be obvious. So I have covered it and now it is stored. Now it's time for fertilizing. For retrieval, I carefully open the foil only as much as needed, and only for as long as necessary to take out the material carefully. And then handle the fertilizer carefully. Again, preferably using a wheel loader or a telescopic loader. Tip the fertilizer directly into the spreader. When you drive onto the field again with the trailer, then make sure that when you load it into the dump truck, the spreading material is covered well with a tarpaulin and not moved too often. That is essentially the key to the whole process. So if you do it properly, there is very little that can go wrong. Nevertheless, we always recommend verifying the calibration chart values with a practical test set, meaning using spreading trays in the field. This shows if no changes have occurred during storage and if the calibration chart settings are correct, so the lateral distribution is accurate. And if you do that, you will enjoy spreading fertilizer. And there will be no issues with lateral distribution. So have fun fertilizing.